Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for participating. We are currently recording this like we have the others, and so we're going to go ahead and get going. So thanks everyone for attending. I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Ilona Nagy, and I am on the HOME-ARP team. And Kelly and Jody, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourselves, that would be great.
My name is Jody Key, and I'm a HOME-ARP specialist.
And my name is Kelly Evans, and I am the HOME-ARP manager.
Excellent. Well, thanks, guys. We're going to go ahead and jump right in. Today, we're discussing staffing and services. We're also going to talk briefly about the Phase 1 submission, as well as other things. It's a very packed conversation we will be having, so you're more than welcome to ask questions throughout. Just go ahead and raise your hand. And the other piece is go ahead and re-review this later on if you need to. We're going to upload this to our YouTube site, so then that way you can access the information. Okay, so moving on to the next thing. So we're going to do a quick project overview. We'll talk about the application fee information, along with posted questions and DCA funding opportunities. We have staffing and services, which is what the main bulk of this conversation is going to be about. And Isaac is here to talk about the coordinated entry piece of it, which is great. And so he'll go ahead and offer some insights with regards to that too. And then any key takeaways. Okay, so again, we have $8.7 million to essentially spend on non-congregate shelter, give or take as needed, so which is good. So don't forget to go ahead and put what you need on your applications, but also don't forget to leverage. So utilize your community partners as well as your local city and county jurisdictions and their support. Also other agencies, and make sure you get the data to back up what you plan to do. So let's talk about some funding opportunities first. We just heard about this actually over the last week. Brittany was unable to make it, but I felt that this was pretty important. This could be potential gap funding. So there is the Southeast Crescent Regional Commission, and this is a federal and state partnership funding opportunity. Okay, so your approval for this funding is not predicated on participation in HOME-ARP and vice versa. So just know that they don't affect each other, but we are going to be talking to one another just in case this is an additional funding source for you. If you do choose to apply. As you can see, primarily the red and the yellow counties are those who can receive funding from this particular arena. And so you'll have the PowerPoint, which will give you access to this particular website so you can find out a little bit more about it. $600,000 is usually the maximum they'll give per organization, and there is a match component. Now, we talked to Brittany and she said that the 20% match of funding can be through HOME-ARP or other federal sources. So just know that there is a match with this, but given who you're working with, it may come as part of the, you may already have it, whether you know it or not. So the pre-application deadline, okay, so that's pre-app, not application. So the pre-application deadline through this website with scrc.gov is the 15th, is September 15th. And then that allows you to potentially apply and submit a full application in November. And so, well, actually it's due in December. So they want to have the final listing of people who will be receiving the money in January. Am I missing anything? I feel like I'm kind of talking half with this whole thing. I know that the three of us were on a conversation with Brittany and Isaac was there too. Am I missing anything on this funding opportunity?
The only thing I can think of is I believe that this is going to be on a rolling basis. So this is the first opportunity to apply for it, but a couple of times a year, they're going to open this up. So if for some reason, this is a pretty tight deadline. But also I would encourage anybody to also forward information about the Southeast Crescent Regional Commission to their local community, like their city manager, county manager, that sort of thing, because there are lots of different areas that this can fund.
Right. And it's really, thanks for stating that, Kelly, because what she was meaning is other areas in the sense of paying for, she talked about a lot of healthcare opportunities, like paying for machines for healthcare and helping with workforce development, those types of things too. So they're wanting to focus on housing with the SCRC, but there may be other opportunities there. You said match, that means the agency has to match that amount, a percentage of the amount, yes. So it would be, so depending on where you're located. So, so Rachel, I know you guys are in North Georgia. So we actually have another opportunity for North Georgia. These are actually just the counties in orange, blue, and red. So let's talk about the next group because it's similar but different. The Appalachian Regional Commission has been around for a little bit longer, and that does include the areas in North Georgia. And so this is, she actually gave an example of one of the counties actually got a very large $1 million, I think it was some sort of screening tool for their local healthcare facility. So that way people didn't have to travel counties over in order to get access to that screening machine. And so, and that was $1 million to do that. So with those who are in the gray, it's a 50% investment by the Appalachian Regional Commission and then a 50% match. Right. And so Walker, Dade, and
Catoosa and Chattooga.
Thank you, Catoosa and Chattooga. Thanks for saying that. Appreciate it, Rachel. So Chattooga actually would be only a 20% match that you would need to do. But for the others around there, it looks like it would be a 50-50. So they would do 50% of investment and then you would have to provide 50% match. So there may be some opportunities for those of you who are in North Georgia, like Rachel, as a possibility too. And this information is on our website. And so I would go ahead and just go onto those, those websites and check it out a little bit if they apply to your county. And again, this will be in the PowerPoint that's going to be posted to the website. And what I'll do is I'll actually take them out and put them on that staffing page as well, the staffing and staffing and services page for that, for the training today. I'll go ahead and put those links on so that way you guys can go directly to it too. Okay.
The other thing that I was going to add, Alona, is that they mentioned to us when they were going through this PowerPoint with us that this is one of the few grants that allow you to use other federal funds as a match.
Yeah.
And so within your healthcare system, within your collaboratives with your cities and your counties, any other grant that you have where you are trying to make that grant work, this can be gap funding for a lot of different programs where you're already receiving federal funds for a portion of it. And this could be what gets you to yes and gets you to full funding. So I would really encourage you to know that when you're looking at other programs, HOME-ARP is a great example, and that's why we're including it. But if you have a gap in funding and you need to try to fill that gap, these two federal regional commissions, because of the uniqueness that they allow federal funds as a match, these would be great gap funding measures for your county, even if it's at the higher match rate, because it's not going to be your predominant grant, it's going to be your secondary grant in a lot of cases. That's not to say it can't be a predominant grant. It can. You can use SPLOST funds, for example, as your match. You can use state funds as your match. But for us, when we were looking at it, it's a great way to get to a place where you're fully funded.
So, okay, are there any other questions? Thanks, Kelly. That was a good insight into this too. Okay, we're going to move on. So I wanted to let y'all know, and I know that Isaac may be able to speak a little bit more to this too. The COC competition is opened, and it opened yesterday, and so this is hot off the presses. So the important dates, this Friday, so tomorrow, they have the new applicant informational webinar, and they have a second of those informational webinars on the 8th, which is next Tuesday. The turnaround time for everything to be kind of processed is really kind of within the month. So it's pretty fast turnaround because officially everything needs to be submitted, I think, in the middle of September. So the best thing to do would be to go, we have two websites here. And so the first is the website for the whole competition, which is the first link. Thanks, Jody. I know you're putting it up there right now. And then the second is actually the PDF that has the competition policy, and that competition policy has the information on the webinars. And so it's best if you go through the competition policy just to kind of see if it's best for you. This may be something for your non-congregate shelter. It may be something for something else that you're working on. And so take a look at the information. So then that way you can see if this is something that is relevant to you. Isaac, is there anything else that you want to mention? I don't know if you're...
No, I think you pretty much covered everything. I know that they have a session tomorrow, but the main thing is that if you're planning on applying, to make sure you join those sessions.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And like Josh said yesterday, make sure you go through the competition policy just to make sure it is something that would be relevant to you, because sometimes you may go to the webinar and then you find out, it's not for you. And so you didn't need to take the time. There's going to be a lot of information is what it sounds like. And it's highly competitive this year. So definitely when you come, bring your A games. So that way we can get more money for Georgia. So next, posted questions. So I'm going to go through these. Actually, and I'm going to use our form responses. So 2020. Okay. Our organization has been operational since 2020 and has not met the uniform guidance needed to complete an audit. We don't have 3 years of financial audits to submit alongside the grant and want to make sure this would not disqualify our organization. It doesn't disqualify, like we talked about last week. If you make less money than the audit requires, a compilation of your financial statements with a review or certification from a CPA will suffice. However, the purpose of the audits are really to ensure that you'll be able to carry the financials and manage the additional funding needed in order to build a non-congregate shelter. So please, let's be very honest about those abilities. If you're not getting an audit now, there's a good chance you will be getting one in the future if you're granting these funds. So, so just make sure that that your organization is equipped and has the capacity. So that is really what it comes down to. The operating budget folder requires the organization to attach the last 3 years of audits or most recent financial statements. If a financial statement is included with the audit, will that suffice, or do they need to be separated? They don't need to be separated, but like I showed last week, just go ahead in the checklist to make sure that you state that they're together. So we're not looking for, you know, for a second one for whatever reason and we can't find it. We should be looking in the audit and it should be there. I get it, but just state for us, financial statements are in the audit. So just make sure you put that in the checklist so we can see that and you're communicating what you have to us. Okay. Okay, so Kelly is going to talk a little bit about this too. It's a very big statement, and the housing first piece, and I'm not sure if the agency that submitted this is on the call right now. So could you clarify the definition of housing first? If an organization provides housing for youth ages 12 to 17, there are certain rules in place they have to follow. So for instance, we're low barrier, but we do require youth residents to participate in services. We have specific structures in place because they're youth, which house rules for all non-congregate shelters are fine. So an example would be not having drugs on property. Okay, that's a very basic one. And so if individuals are not following that policy, if they're threatening the health and safety of people on site, that is going to be an issue that needs to be rectified, and therefore housing, so their housing is not guaranteed in that sense. But in all other reasons, you should have a housing first policy, which means your housing comes first and not necessarily your participation in everything. Housing is the first thought, okay? And as long as they're following the house rules, that's the priority, and that it is along the lines of fair housing policy. So at that intro, I'm going to turn it over to Kelly because we had a bit of a long conversation around this earlier. And so, Kelly, what are your additional thoughts? Because I know you've done some research into this too.
Yeah, so we have to follow the final HOME-ARP notice, implementation notice, which is CPD 2110 from HUD. And in there is a section on page 4 that talks about unaccompanied youth under the age of 25. And part of that section references, I don't know, it's either 5 or 6 other statutes and their definitions. So I went down the rabbit hole to try to determine exactly what that means. And it's about as clear as mud. So what I determined is that for most of the definitions of homeless in relationship to youth, and youth is a term that is used up to age 25 in certain statutes. So anyone under 25, the aspect of them being homeless typically refers to them in terms of being accompanied homeless youth. And so there is an adult who is either required to be their proxy, and either through, for example, they are in foster care, or they have a parent or guardian that is with them. The unaccompanied youth portion is very poorly defined, as in what age ranges that is and what part of other statutes that it's referring to. So this question was specifically for 12 to 17-year-olds, and we really need to dig in, and I'm going to, and figure out what that looks like for unaccompanied youth that are under 18. Who don't have the right of, they're not emancipated, or they are not adults. They cannot sign for themselves. So they don't have the right of self-determination, because that is a whole different subset. If you are looking to provide shelter for unaccompanied youth under the ages of 18, I need you to reach out and email us and let us know that so that we can begin to address it directly, because there are a lot of things that come into play. If you are looking to provide shelter for families that have youth, then that is clearly defined under HOME-ARP, and we're good. Now, here's the issue. The statutes, independent of age range or whether they are accompanied or unaccompanied, the statute is very, very clear. You cannot require them to participate.
Security code.
Hold on.
You have
Okay.
2.
Okay, go ahead.
You good?
I thought she may have to ask a question, which is why I left it unmuted.
Sure.
So, yeah.
So you may find that that this grant's not applicable for you because you cannot require service participation under this grant. That is both a Housing First model stipulation, but it's also specifically spelled out in the statute as not allowable under the HOME-ARP funding. And we don't have any, we have no discretion there. To go back to what Alana was saying, house rules are different than mandatory participation. An example would be you may have a house rule that the property is no smoking, and you may not allow smoking or vaping on property. However, you cannot require that they participate in a smoking cessation process or program as a qualification for them to be housed. You just can say, we don't allow that on property. It is the actual act of requiring them to participate in a program that is statutorily prohibited. So if you have more questions on that, I know that this is a sticking point. Please send us a request for more information or clarification. And if we have to, we'll just reach out to HUD under their frequently asked questions and get some definitions from them.
Well, and yeah, part of that, like Kelly said, and to kind of just reiterate, the whole purpose of Housing First is as long as they're really not doing something that threatens the health and safety of the people at the house. And that includes if they don't do programming, that doesn't threaten their ability to stay housed. And that's that the housing does legitimately come first with their situation. And so, because so often the program participation piece has people leave housing when the housing piece needs to come first. So I feel like I'm not expressing that well, but that we have a question that came up. We are trying to have transitional housing for those in our care who age out at 21. They have no place to go. Okay, so Rachel, I'm not quite sure. I think you may need to clarify that question. I feel like you're trying to see if people under 21 can stay in a non-congregate shelter that you build.
Yeah, let me go ahead, Rachel, and then I'm going to jump in.
Yeah, that is one kind of thought too. But right now we have a couple in our care who in the cottage who are 21 and they have no place to go. And like I say, I'm trying to do transitional housing for them and for the domestic violence women, and then eventually have people come and be. So that's what I'm trying to ask. I mean, if they're 21, aren't they going to be allowed to? I don't know what I'm trying to say, I guess.
No, I know what you're trying to say, because that was in part of the statute that I was reading. So there are provisions within that section that I referenced. When you go down the rabbit hole of all of the statutes that it refers to, one of the statutes that it refers to, and don't ask me which one, I can find it for you, but I can't tell you off the top of my head. It specifically talks about youth who are aging out of programs. From our perspective, you don't age out of HOME-ARP. HOME-ARP covers people from at least 18 to seniors, and there is no aging out. So if you get a grant and you establish HOME-ARP units, those units are what they are. They don't age out of them. They can transition out of them when you can transition them to either subsidized affordable housing or regular affordable housing. But no, under the statute, when it references youth, it is specifically, there are two different sections that talk about youth that age out of that program that it references at 22, and another one where they age out at 25. It's specific to those other programs, but it specifically says that there has to be a transitional period if they are already part of the program prior to hitting the maximum age. So you may not be able to introduce somebody under a different grant program once they're over 21, but if they're part of that program under 21, you could. From HOME-ARP's perspective, we take everybody that's 18 or over. That's not in question. For me, what's in question here is how do you house unaccompanied youth? Because accompanied youth, you're making an agreement between someone who is over 18. And under Georgia law, you can make those kinds of agreements. I'm not as familiar with, if they're not emancipated and they're youth, who are you making the agreement with? And that's what I've got to go figure out. 18 and above, though, you're golden when it comes to HOME-ARP.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know, because if they're 18 and up, 21, they can make their own decisions.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and I'm very clear on that part of the state law, and you're good, 18 and over. And under HOME-ARP, there is no maximum length of time, so there is no aging out of the program. I mean, obviously, you want to work people through the program to free up that unit for the next person in need, and that's part of the housing continuum that we're working on. Is okay, what would the next step be then? Obviously, we want to get them a voucher and we want to get them into affordable housing. And if they need wraparound services, we want to provide those services. But that's different than the non-congregate shelter grant. And so, trying to find a way to provision and fund the entire spectrum of supportive services, this is just one piece of it. But no, you're not going to have to run people out on any kind of arbitrary deadline. This grant specifically addresses that and says, no, you're not required to do that.
So you were addressing with Rachel as well as the next question of please state the maximum length of, and I'm doing this for the recording, please state the maximum length of time an individual can remain in a unit. Like Kelly said, there's no maximum or minimum for that matter. According to HOME-ARP, the implementation notice and everything that they have there. However, in the next phase of your application, there is some pieces around talking about that with your program and how it looks like with your program. And if you do have time limits, you're going to have to explain why and what would be the reasoning of people to leave and things like that. So and we'll talk about that more in future trainings, but there is no time limit according to the HOME-ARP regulations and statutes. However, if you do have it a part of your programming, which is fine, you're just going to have to explain it. And so because we understand that you need to make room for other people to come in, this isn't permanent supportive housing either. It is a shelter, so which makes it all the more somewhat confusing. So it's a little messy, it feels like, but I hope that it explains to you kind of where that it's all gray. There's no specific lines and I know in some programming that HUD does, there are very specific lines with emergency solutions grants, things like that. So, okay. Next question. For proof of access to city and county utilities for water, sewer, gas, and electric, or estimate cost to install connect. Can we provide a utility bill for a property if there are existing structures on the property connected to utilities? We are rehabbing a building that is on the same campus with a number of buildings that are connected to utilities. So the reason why we ask for something is to ensure that the additional cost of installing utilities is considered, that if you're having to do extra construction, you know, that's a part of all of your costs. So we really just need a letter from your municipality that identifies the services available. And that includes, you know, electric, sewer, water, everything that are ready to be connected and used when occupied, gosh, that was 2 sentences that ended up being one, when it's occupied. So just make sure that you just have, and if you need to have it from, again, we talked last week and the week before about due diligence. So contacting your electric company, specifically if it's a municipality kind of issue that covers a range of utilities, that's even better. Whatever that looks like, just making sure that you have confirmation that y'all are good to go and you don't have to do any additional infrastructure construction, and that all you have to do is connect one to the other and boom, it's all good. So just have a letter and or letters stating that, and hopefully that should cost nothing. Just doing your due diligence by contacting those agencies and getting the confirmation of that, okay? The mailing address, I'm going to talk about that more in a second, but I'm going to post the mailing address too. And then we had the last question regarding sensitive information regarding board members who do have lived experiences, but would rather not have that expressed in the information. And use the following wording in this section. For the purpose of confidentiality, this response will be personally submitted and approved by HOME-ARP staff. And so when we see that response, we'll reach out for independent confirmation and notate that confirmation in the application for compliance and audit. So, so thank you for asking that question. That is a really important question. And so that's the best way to address those things. Kelly, I know that you specifically answered this one. Is there anything else that you wanted to state around that? Okay. Okay, cool. So moving on to the next piece. Actually, I can close that. Noted in our manual, the DCA charges a non-refundable application fee for the non-congregate shelter application in the program. A $200 check for the application fee must be mailed and postmarked by Friday, August 15th at 11:59 p.m. Okay, so send all application fees to Lisa Ivy and using this particular address, please. And also state HOME-ARP non-congregate shelter application fee in the address. The application, your application will only be reviewed if DCA receives the application fee within 7 days of the deadline. So if you're able to send that sooner than later, that would be great. So that way we have it in hand, but we'll wait till 7 days after the 15th to make sure that it's been, you know, mailed. And I think that's it. Okay, so just make sure, and this is all in the manual. So please, if you have any other additional questions, this was actually taken from the manual that we have that we put together. So there's that. And then lastly, I wanted to make sure that y'all were aware of some pieces with HUD Exchange. The HOME-ARP non-congregate shelter piece, I wanted to make sure you guys were aware of this. This just came out hot off the presses today. We have the eligible costs handout for non-congregate shelter, which I know was asked about last week. And I was putting together something, and this is even better because it's directly from HUD. So they're the ones who audit it. They're the ones who are saying yes or no. So follow this. And again, these links are in the, I'll go ahead and put them in our list when you look at the page for this particular training, but it's also in the PowerPoint. And you could also go on HUD Exchange if you want to. And so it goes through all the different pieces as far as the eligible costs under the non-congregate shelter. And so and which includes the related soft costs. So I know a lot of you, the hard costs are a given. I mean, I think you all know about the bricks and sticks portion, but this is the piece that I really encourage you to take a look at and look deeply at, because it may pay for things you never considered, and it may not pay for things that you thought it would cover. So please take a look at the soft costs and take a look at this whole thing. It's just 4 pages, super easy. And I really appreciate the marketing pieces that they're doing for HOME-ARP with HUD Exchange, because for the most part, they're fairly easy to read and understand. So please check them out, okay? And again, all of this information is will be posted on the site. So usually I get those up within 24 hours or so, okay? So we're going to talk about staffing and services now. That was a 37-minute up, you know, we had some talking going on beforehand. So let's talk about these pieces. So again, every section has a submission checklist. So let me state first, we have done, this is the 5th training that we have, okay? For the 15th of August, we're going to have the first 4 sections. So that does not include this section, okay? This section is due September 15th, not August 15th. So the best thing to do is you can go ahead and attend this training, but then put it to the side and finish the first 4 sections, okay? And that includes the data SWOT section, your operations budget, your the overview for the development of your non-congregate shelter, and then your non-congregate shelter budget. So those are the first 4 requirements that you're going to have to be sent into us by 11:59 on August 15th. Okay, next week we're going to talk on the 10th about packaging everything together and what we're expecting. Okay, so as requested, y'all asked for that. So we're going to do that next Thursday at 1 o'clock, same time, same bat place. What was it? Same bat time, same bat place. So super old school. And so go ahead and, you know, like I said, just take this information in, but then put it to the side, because those other 4 pieces need to be focused on for submission on the 15th. So in 12 days. Okay, that's a Tuesday. Okay. So, like I stated before, when you're doing the submission checklists, make sure you go ahead and go through and check through all of these different pieces that you have. And if you have a change or addition to something, okay, just make sure you go ahead and create, because we've made this on purpose flexible. So then that way you can add to it. Please don't delete anything, but you can add to it different lines if you have additional documentation that you're submitting. Okay, so and so speaking to the earlier question about the financial statements and the audit, that would be something that you can add. You can highlight it and say financial statements are in the audit. So then that way it lets us know what you are doing, so we know what to look for from what you're submitting. Okay, so this is a place to actually communicate to us what you have submitted and why. Okay, so moving on to the next section with staffing. Like it says up here, list staff employed by your agency to work in this project by position, such as house managers, case managers, etc. Using the tables below, check the box that describes their employment status and describes their duties and qualifications as relevant. So what I did was I gave kind of an example of what that would look like for both a full-time and a part-time staff member, okay? And so I fully understand that for some of the individuals who are working for you, that all of their time for case manager may not be for non-congregate shelter. They may be there may be another portion of your programming that they're going to be dedicated to case manage. So go ahead, and I know you guys have done this in applications in the past, at least I'm hoping so, to go ahead and state how much of their full-time time is dedicated to non-congregate shelter. And so all the requirements and the duties with regards to NCS that you're going to include, as well as their past employee shelter history, okay? And we just need something basic. We need the dates, and we essentially need their jobs and then the agency that they worked for, okay? So, and this is all going to be, it's in the PowerPoint. So as you can see, it's right here. So you guys can check the PowerPoint to show what you've done, okay? And so for the part-time staff, going ahead and saying that they're part-time, 50% of their time is dedicated to the non-congregate shelter, and the intake coordinator is admitting new clients, determining their requirements, those types of things, and their employee shelter history. So that kind of gives us a general overview of who's going to be participating actively with the non-congregate shelter. Are there any questions? Okay. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, supportive services. So this is probably the most somewhat daunting piece. So I know it looks like a lot, but the whole reason why we did it this way is so then that way you can just take an agency and just go and answer questions all the way down the line to make it as easy as possible, okay? We have general services, we have housing assistance to be provided, and then the financial assistance to be provided to the individuals in the non-congregate shelter. And like with the other worksheets that you're working with, this little red dot on the side indicates that there is a note there. So the examples to reference are located there. So rental application fees, security deposits. So these are the agencies that are going to be providing that. Okay, so with your partnerships, with your MOUs, those agencies that you're working with to take care of that. Okay, so I'm going to go back here because I want to break this down. So we just talked about that as far as the examples to reference. So you name the organization. You state whether it's you or a third party. Okay, so what you're supplying. Now, primarily, this is for those first three sections. Let me go back to that. Up here, as far as qualifying the population determination, assessment of service needs, and offering case management. These pieces, if they're not being supplied by your agency, we need to know who they're being supplied by. Okay, so that's where you state here that your agency is supplying the qualifying population determination, the assessment of needs, and offering case management. If for whatever reason you're not supplying that, you need to let us know. Okay. And again, you're probably going to want to have some sort of agreement that you can submit to show that this other agency is going to be doing this for us. Okay. So that's the question here. Do you have an agreement such as a contract MOU with this supportive agency? And will services be on-site or off-site? Okay. Now, for some of you who are a part of coordinated entry, and this is really, in some cases, relevant in that sense because the coordinated entry site. Okay, I'll answer that question in a minute, Rachel. So if you have coordinated entry and you are not the main site for your system of coordinated entry, then some of these pieces may be off-site because the VI SPDAT that you may be using is, well, not maybe, would be using if you're doing coordinated entry, is going to be with that agency. And so that's going to be put into client track. And so you just need to make sure that you're really clear with who's providing these services and what other services people in the non-congregate shelter will be receiving. So if there are additional pieces, if your agency is providing everything, okay, and on this list, there are 2 to 3 things that you are providing, like life skills training, outpatient health services, and taking them there. credit counseling and money management, those types of things, make sure you just go ahead and state that as the services to be provided and that you guys are doing that. And then you don't have to worry about the MOUs, the services are going to be on site. And then you go through what you're going to be providing to the individuals who are in your non-congregate shelter. And so Rachel wrote, will letters of support and MOUs work? Yes, that's fine. We just need to know that you have an agreement with another agency to provide those services and that both of you are on the same page. And that's what those two things do. Okay. So I'm going to continue going through these areas. So absolutely. You're welcome. Okay. This is just an easier way to go through. If off-site, proximity to the site in miles, and if transportation will be provided. So if you're not providing a service, you need to let us know how the person's going to get there. It's pretty obvious. Describe how the need for services is determined. And so any particular if it's from the original intake assessment, if it's from conversations afterwards, if it's a request from the person, whatever it may be that determines the services that they're receiving. Like, for example, with the credit history, if you happen to go through the assessment, you notice that they have severe debt and you're like, okay, we can start working on this debt because they have a part-time job and we can contribute to that debt with the money that they're making and helping them with budgeting. So if you guys are doing that with them, fabulous. If you have an MOU with a local credit counseling center, fabulous. Just let us know how they're going to get there and what those services will look like as far as helping them determine how to fix their credit issues. Okay. So, and then it just goes into letting us know the processes in order to receive those services. So does the service provider have written procedures for maintaining a waiting list for program participants? And if so, please describe. This may not be relevant to some of the services, so you would just put NA, okay? If it is relevant, if there are wait lists, so for example, let's see, what's a good example? So Medicaid is a perfect example with receiving additional services that are waiver based. They may be on a waiting list for a waiver. That's a perfect example, and that would be a healthcare service. So if you get them through Medicaid, they get approved for Medicaid, but they can't receive the waiver yet because they're on a wait list for it. That's where you would state that kind of information. The proposed number of beneficiaries, and so how many people you want to serve with that particular credit counseling or helping them get on Medicaid or whatever the case may be, how many people you want to help. Describe their due process for people who are terminated. So that's just how you can take a look again at what's going on and how to remedy that. The annual cost for service and program delivery, if there are any costs for you. And then the proposed direct cost of the service and program through September 20th, 2030. So that way we know to put that into, consideration for the operating costs. So I know this was big, lots of information. Any thoughts or ideas around this? Okay. Kelly, Jody, any other additional pieces that you want to mention? It's a lot of info. So, and remember guys, this piece is not due until September 15th. So please do not start hyperventilating right now that it's due in a week and a half, okay? You have a little more time to put this together, okay? And again, this should all be tied back to your planning that you did in phase 1 of this entire process. So you should be able to directly tie all of this information and your plan back to what you did in the first week that we started walking through this together, okay? Ever talked about supplanting? I'm not quite, we've not.
Supplanting.
Okay,
We-
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I think I
Sorry.
may need some more information.
Like supplanting, if I had written a grant to another place and I'm supplanting some of that information and I'm getting some funding from you, and let's say I don't use all that funding from you, I'm going to use it for something else. To me, that's supplanting from this, the amount of money you approve me of. And I mean, so have we ever talked a little bit about that? Supplanting in grants? I want to make sure I don't.
No, we've not.
So
I think
let me address that.
okay. Yeah. 'Cause
Okay, so first of all, you can never commingle HUD funds. You have to always make sure you maintain HUD funds completely separately with very, very good boundaries, excellent record keeping, and they are subject to audit for
Okay, good.
years.
Good.
Okay, that's the first answer to that. The second answer to that is within a HUD program, within the plan that is submitted by the agency that is receiving the funds from HUD, which in this case would be us. You can, as a subgrantee, you can move money around within the grant with approval.
Oh.
And so if you get 3 years down the road, 2 years down the road, I mean, this is a construction grant for the most part, so it's less likely that it's going to be, very long. But let's say you get into the construction of it and by some miracle, construction costs drop, and we need to move money around. Likelihood is it's going to be the opposite. You have the ability to move money from line item to line item with approval, as long as it's within the scope of the plan that we submitted to HUD. That's one of the reasons you have to have our approval. So you have some flexibility within the grant. You do not have any flexibility when it comes to commingling funds between this HUD program and any other program within or outside of HUD.
Awesome. So glad you were here, Callie.
Yeah, because that makes it more clear, and I'm glad that we will be audited and we will be, in case I ever leave as an executive director, that you will keep track of this place. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the, it's kind of one of the founding principles under HUD grants, and under federal grants in general. They want real clean demarcation lines between the grants. Even if you have multiple HUD grants, they still want to see very, very clear and clean demarcation lines. So typically, when I'm administering HUD grants, that's going to include separate checking accounts. That's going to include making sure that when I code checks in a way that specify exactly that they are from this grant under this funded line item. That kind of due diligence is what's going to make it the cleanest possible transactions, and give you the best audit.
Okay. Awesome. Good question. And I think part of I was like, because we're doing just mainly construction, so I'm like, that part I wasn't understanding because my brain is just in the construction space. So that's great. Thank you for clarifying. So we're going to move to the rest of this because we have about 5 minutes left. So go ahead and break down, if you're having a specific cost. I just gave an example of counseling. So you may have several, pieces from a different agency, community service board. If you're not a community service board, you may be partnering with one in order to provide some services. And so if you happen to be, so this is the breakdown of partnering agencies' cost with the non-congregate shelters. So this is going to be something that you're paying for. If they're paying for it, it's okay to just note it up here. But if there's going to be expenses involved with the non-congregate shelter, you're going to need to state it here. And it's a pretty easy breakdown of the hourly rate, which includes the benefits, annual hours. Okay. So this is at, I think I was doing 10 hours a week. So 52 weeks, 10 hours a week, 520. Estimated cost at $40 an hour. Years of service. So your non-congregate shelter, if it's built new, would be 15 years. And so that ends up being $93,000 over the course of 15 years. Okay. And so that will then populate this area down here. And so if this is something that you are not spending money on for your non-congregate shelter and essentially getting all of your services donated, you do not need to add this in. Okay. Because we really just need to know how much you are spending on the non-congregate shelter and then where that money is coming from. But if it's in kind, that's a whole different issue, okay? Describe how the organization, agency, or service provider will identify appropriate services for program participants, and then describe how the organization, agency, or service provider will prevent duplication of services. So again, this is just kind of spelling out to us how people are going to be receiving services, the requirements that they have, and then how you're going to prevent that duplication piece. So, for example, I always like to use the example of a food pantry because there are food pantries everywhere. And if we were able to actually, as far as food pantries, which are good, I'm not saying that they're not good, but oftentimes I think that if we actually started combining some of those food pantry services into fewer options, then we could start combining the cost of those food pantry services, and then that way be able to give out even more food because you're putting more of that money that's instead of going to the duplication of all the different food pantries into just a few. And then that way you're able to actually funnel a lot of those costs into more food, or maybe a more diverse range of food that you're able to supply to individuals. So that's kind of what we mean by duplication of services. So another would be a counselor. If you're paying for a counselor on your own, that may be great. Or if it's possible to combine that with what's going on in your local community service board, who already has counseling services built into their programming, then that would be one type of service that you can actually have another agency do in order to complement what you're doing. Okay. So any other thoughts, Kelly, Jody? Okay. Well, beans. And lastly, since we're almost done, again, I didn't really put names in because I didn't really feel it was necessary for this example, but it's really just the basics. Oops, you're going to want to put in a list of your organization's current board or governing members. Information must include name, address, office held, term of office, compensation, profession, qualification, race, gender, ethnicity, and homeless or formerly homeless status. So this is just essentially an overview. Obviously, it doesn't include all of this information. Putting together a separate list, or if you have all of this information in this list, you can essentially put here at the top in, the full list is on this particular page. Some of you already have this already put together. Okay, thanks, Rachel. It's good to see you. So if you'd like to go ahead and put that, if you have all of this information in another form, that's fine. Just let us know. Okay, if you're attaching it, you're including it into, if you're including it into one of the file folders, just make sure you let us know and state it is right, it's in this particular folder. Okay. But again, it has to state all of this information. It shouldn't be missing anything. So if you go above and beyond, then that's perfect. Okay. And then we're going to be talking about scoring sheets next week. And we're going to be going over all the scoring sheets next week. Let's see. Okay. So just to wrap up, because it's 2:01. This is pretty much it. I think we covered most everything and all the questions. Kelly, Jody, do you guys have any additional pieces? Nope. Okay. So the key takeaways are just be as thorough as possible, try and avoid that duplication of services. And then also, if you have any pieces that are more thorough in what you have, just go ahead and let us know in our documentation to state, yes, it's here, it's in this file, please check here for that information. So I think that's it. We will be on next Thursday at 1 o'clock. We're going to go over those, everything to submit on the 15th. Take a look at those checks for $200 and get those sent in. And then if you guys have any additional questions, be sure to submit it on the form online. So I think that's it. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and we will see you next Thursday. Okay. Bye, guys.